All right, hello everyone. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Today is the first installment of our beekeeping video series. I've given this talk a few times online and in person, so this is our first time recording it and hopefully making it available to anyone who wants to watch on YouTube. So, we'll just go ahead and get started. My name is Tara Lynn, and I work here at Mosquito Control in Citrus County. I've been here for about 5 years now, almost. And for 4 of those years, we've been beekeeping. So we've had bees on our property and, we started from scratch. So we have a little bit of experience. I'm also in the UF IFIS Master Beekeeper program. So I'm hopefully going to be getting that certification soon. And I went to UF, I got my degree in entomology. So I studied mosquitoes and bees. And then, honeybees and beekeeping kind of became an interest of mine. So, we'll just go ahead and get started. So, our schedule for this presentation is just basically to talk about the biology of honeybees. If you're getting into beekeeping, it's really important to understand the bees themselves before you get them. That way, you know what to expect from them and you know how to work them in your hives. So, we'll talk about the life cycle. We'll talk about the different castes of honeybees. We'll talk about honeybees as a superorganism. We'll talk briefly about nutrition and swarming. And also at the end of each presentation, I have a list of helpful resources that you can take and further your beekeeping journey. So I like to give this disclaimer in all of our beekeeping workshops is this is not an exhaustive presentation on everything honeybees. So you're not going to learn everything you could possibly need to know for beekeeping in 50 minutes or even over the series of presentations that we're going to be posting because there's just so much to learn and a lot of it is experience based as well. So, as you continue your beekeeping journey, you're going to learn a lot of these things. But just take what you learn here from this introduction or this exposure to beekeeping and continue your training elsewhere. Go to bee college or look at YouTube videos, join the beekeeping club, and build upon your knowledge that you get here. So we'll start out introducing the honeybee that you're most likely going to be working with, the honeybee that we work with, and that is Apis mellifera. So they are the Western honeybee. This is their scientific name, Apis mellifera. They're the Western honeybee from Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. So you might hear them also referred to as the European honeybee, but they're also from Africa and the Middle East too. So Western honeybee is probably a more fitting name. They're not native to the United States. They were actually brought over as livestock, when we colonized the US. So they are not native to here. They're not from here. They are an introduced species, and there are wild or feral colonies of honeybees that stem from these livestock colonies. So they're out there in the wild, they're feral, but they're not native. So that's an important distinction to make when we talk about bees. Um, the specific species that we're going to be talking about is Apis mellifera ligustica. So that's the Italian honeybee. And again, this is the one that most beekeepers start with. They're mild-mannered, they're easy to work. They're pretty good honey producers. So we are, working with those in our program, and a lot of people start out with these and work with these. So we'll be talking specifically about that strain of honeybee. So their just generic life cycle is they go through complete metamorphosis. So they start out as an egg in those cells. So, a typical frame of bees, they've got all those honeycomb shaped cells. And on a few of those frames, the queen bee will lay all of these eggs. And they're very tiny down at the bottom of the cell. They can be very hard to see, and I'll have pictures later on. And then they hatch into a larva after a few days. So they'll transform, go through bigger and bigger growth stages as a larva, and then they will transform into that pupa stage, and that's where they're going to be, really preparing to emerge as an adult. And the honeybees are going to cap that cell, and then they'll emerge as an adult. And I have a life cycle diagram at the end of this presentation. Um, that's a great thing to have handy in your office or on your phone near you when you're working your bees, because understanding their life cycle and how long it takes them to go from egg to adult can really help you in determining some management decisions that you'll have to make. So here is a picture of those eggs down at the bottom of the cells. Now this is really magnified and they're really hard to see. They're like little grains of rice. And sometimes if the lighting's not great, these can be really hard to spot if you're first starting out. Now, if you see eggs, it's a great sign that your queen bee is there and your hive is most likely doing very well. It's healthy. It's got a queen. So seeing eggs is often a great sign if you can spot them. And here's another picture of what those eggs look like next to the larva. So here, if hopefully you can see my cursor in the recording, but there's these little grains of rice down here, and that's what those eggs are. And here's what they look like pictured next to the little larva. So after the larva hatch out of the egg, like right after, they're very small. And they're like, you can barely see them, and then they get bigger and bigger as they feed on this uh, syrup down here from the bees that the nurse bees feed them. So that is going to help them grow, and then eventually they're going to look like big and grub-like this larva right here. And then eventually they'll want to pupate and they'll get capped, which it's kind of blurry, but there's some cappings right here, and that's a sign of pupa. So here's what that capped brood looks like as well. So brood is the baby bees. So that's what we're referring to when we say brood. There's a lot of jargon in beekeeping that you just kind of pick up as you go along. But if you see these types of cappings, okay, I've got a lot of pupa that are about to be emerging as adult honeybees pretty soon, and I'm going to have a population boom once all of these pupa emerge. So that's a great sign. If you have several frames full of brood, then that's awesome. But honeybees, when they hatch out of the pupal stage, they uncap those brood cappings, and they come out as worker bees. So they are going to be responsible for the maintenance of the hive. Now, these are the female bees, and they don't lay eggs. That job is specifically for the queen bee. But they are responsible for everything in the hive, taking care of the brood. That's what the nurse bees do. So when they first hatch out, they're immediately nurse bees. And as they age, they go through these different types of jobs. So, the younger they are, they're in the nest. They're going to be taking care of the larvae, cleaning cells. They're going to be cleaner bees and receiver bees, receiving resources from foraging bees. They're going to grow up, they're going to be undertakers, so they are responsible for taking the dead bodies out of the hive because honeybees are super cleanly and hygienic. So they're going to want to take, anything out of their hive that could, rot or introduce pathogen to their brood. So they have cleaners, undertakers, they have wax builders, um, guard bees. They're posted outside of the hive to make sure that nothing coming into the hive is going to harm them. So they will actually search the foragers that are coming in, and make sure that they're supposed to be coming back to their hive. And then, the job that they have when they're the oldest is the foragers. So they're the most expendable, they're the oldest, and they go out and they're the ones who risk their lives every day to get that nectar and pollen and bring it back to the hive. So here's a picture of what the drone bee looks like. Now, this is the male, and they look more robust bodied than the worker bees. So a great way to tell them apart is that the drones have these really fat compound eyes up here that touch in the middle. And the worker bees, I'll go back to the picture, they don't have that. They have a tuft of hair in the middle of their eyes. So that's a good way to spot the drones. And you might see these during hive inspections, just hanging out on the frames. Again, they're not building wax, they're not taking care of the brood. They're really just roaming around the hive and eating resources. They don't even feed themselves. The workers even have to feed them. So during the winter, when it's not reproduction season and the drones aren't out mating with other queen bees from other hives, the worker bees will actually kick them out of the hive because they're an extra mouth to feed in the winter and they don't want to have to do that. So they will actually kick the drones out. But they are responsible for mating with other queens and keeping colony genetics going. So they're good for something. This is what the queen bee looks like. So there's one queen in a hive of 40,000 or more bees, and they're all her offspring. So she will lay a fertilized egg, and that will be a worker bee, or she could lay an unfertilized egg, and that will be a drone bee. So all of the bees in the hive are going to be her bees. She can lay thousands of eggs a day. She's really, really efficient at doing that. And you can tell her apart because she's got this elongated abdomen here, which the worker bees and drone bees do not have. They look very different. But she can be very hard to see in a hive full of that many bees. It can be looking for a needle in a haystack. So a lot of beekeepers will choose to mark their queens. That way she's a little bit easier to spot. But you can see in this picture how she does look very different. She's got this elongated abdomen. Sometimes they can look really vastly different. And as soon as your eye catches that difference, you go, oh, there's the queen. But marking them can be a useful tool so you can see her better. But she will go out, she will, emerge from her queen cell, which is a special cell that the bees raise queens in. And she will go on a mating flight and she'll mate with 15 or so drones at one time during this one mating flight, and then she'll come back to the hive and she will not leave again for the rest of her life unless she swarms. That is a possibility, but she won't have to leave to get food or mate again. She'll have all the sperm that she needs for the rest of her life to lay eggs. So once she goes on that mating flight, she'll come back and she'll start her egg laying process and keep going and going until she doesn't anymore. And, hopefully queens will last you a year or two. They used to last a lot longer. We don't really know why they're not lasting as long now. But requeening every year is sometimes a good practice depending on where you are in your beekeeping journey. If you're wanting really productive colonies and you're really wanting to produce a lot of honey and you want them to be really robust, it's recommended to requeen her yearly. If you're just a backyard hobbyist and you don't really certainly care about this most high production that you can get, then just keeping her healthy and happy until she naturally ceases her egg laying, that then she's good to go. You can just keep her around for as long as you can, but usually a couple years is how long they naturally last. Okay, so here's that chart that I was talking about that goes through their different life cycles timings. So drones actually take the longest to hatch out, and they take 24 days to go from egg to adult. Workers will take 21 days, and queens will take 16. So this is useful if like you have a situation where you've lost a queen and you need them to make their own new queen, you know that your hive's going to be queenless for at least 16 days. So are you willing to have them be queenless for 2 weeks? How does that, what time of year is it? How does that work in your program? So having this chart handy is really useful. And here is just an example of what a frame would look like with all of these resources on them. So here at the bottom, obviously we've got lots of bees coating this frame. This frame looks really good, really healthy. There's a ton of brood here at the bottom. And above that, we've got some pollen in here. So the bees will collect pollen and bring that back to the hive. And that's what that looks like, the yellowy powdery stuff that's kind of packed in there. That's pollen. And this wet stuff, that's nectar, and they get that from flowers as well. They'll store that and they will feed that to the brood, but also they will feed honey. And so that's why they have honey up here as well. And nectar, when it, is ripe and ready to be capped and turned into honey, they will go ahead and cap that. And that's what that looks like. So another reason why I included this picture is so you can see the difference between capped brood and capped honey. A lot of times when you're first starting out, it can be really hard to tell them apart. But the brood is more like a raised brown capping, and the honey is more like a sunken yellow capping. Of course, it depends on your area and the color and age of your wax. But that's a good general rule. So moving on to nutrition, this is really important. They have to have nectar and pollen. And they need water and plant resins as well. So they need nectar for a sugar source, and they get that from flowers. They get pollen too from flowers, and that's a protein source. So they need both of those to be able to carry on their necessary life functions, right? They got to have sugar to be able to fly around and do their daily tasks. But they also need water. They'll use that for hive air conditioning and maintaining humidity levels and proper temperature. And they need plant resins too. So they will collect these plant resins to make a glue for their hive called propolis. And that helps really seal all the cracks and crevices so that, bacteria and different pathogens and things can't come in. And that helps maintain hive hygienics. So that is really important for them to collect as well. And we'll cover nutrition more in future PowerPoints. Again, this is just going to be like an introduction to their biology and how to get started versus a deep dive. But moving on to nucleus colonies versus packages. So when you're becoming a beekeeper, you're thinking about being a beekeeper, you have to think about where you're going to get your bees from. And they sell them in two different ways. So you could either get a nucleus colony, which is usually from another beekeeper. They will actually split their hives into two to be able to make nucleus colonies. And so a typical hive box is like 10 frames, and a nucleus is going to be like five or two, typically five. And they will come with all of your resources. So honey, pollen, nectar, bees, wax, drawn out wax on the frames, and of course bees. And starting out with nucleus colonies is really helpful because when you install your bees into your hive box, they've already got resources to start out versus if you get a package shipped to you full of bees, it's just bees. So you shake them into your hive box that may be empty, and then they have to go out and, forage for resources, build all that wax, and it can be cumbersome, especially if you aren't really that familiar with the area that you're in, if you don't know what resources are out there, it can be hard for them to build up quickly. Getting a nucleus colony just kind of gives them a head start with all those extra resources. But both options are available, and depending on your situation, it might be more feasible to just get the bees and not have to get all those resources. Packages of bees are certainly cheaper as well because you're not getting all these frames, but just something to be aware of. Those different options are out there. And here's just another picture of what it looked like when we transferred when you're transferring your nucleus colony into a 10 frame hive box, it can be, you've got to have space for them to expand. And so moving them out of that nucleus package immediately is as soon as you get it and bring it back to your apiary is pretty essential because, they need to have room to expand or they're going to leave this box and you don't want to lose your bees. So here is just a picture of what it looks like inspecting the hive. So I see some honey here. I see lots of comb full of nectar. So these bees are doing great foraging and building comb on these frames. Okay, so we talked about biology of the honeybees, the different types of bees that are out there. And now we're going to talk about apiary maintenance, location for your apiary, and pest management. Now, again, this is just, an introduction to these topics, and we'll go into more detail, especially about pest management. I've got a whole PowerPoint about pest management. But when you're starting out, you want to find a location for your apiary that's a pretty big area, especially if you know you're going to want to grow or have more hives one day. You want to have enough space for them to be away from people, away from any pets or tethered animals or neighbors or passers-by. If you live in a busy city or neighborhood, you want to make sure that your bees aren't regularly coming into contact with others, just to protect yourself and to protect other people as well from stings. So here on our property, we're on about 10 acres, and this is the spot that we chose for our bees right over here in this little clearing. So they got mostly sun at around noon, but they do have shade cover as well. So we thought that was a perfect spot. It was a pretty flat area. It didn't flood, so that was good. And it was away from employees and members of the public who might be visiting our office. And so we put down this like visqueen plastic stuff on top of the grass, and we've got some landscaping timbers here as well, just to serve as a foundation. Now you don't have to do all this. We knew we wanted a nice looking area, especially if members of the public were coming and visiting our beehives. We wanted it to look really nice. So we did go ahead and put down this rock as well, just to make it look even better. And then we've got these cinder blocks here with the timbers going across. Now that is to serve as a hive stand. So um, I've got pictures of it later, but we just put our hives right on top of here. And then we added a water feature as well. So bees need water, like we talked about earlier. So you have to provide some sort of water source for them. Either if you have like a natural pond or something like a fountain, we added a bird bath. We also later added a chicken water. So we put a chicken water over here on the sides, just to give them ample water resources. And so there's our nukes again. And then here's pictures of us installing our bees. So we started out with two boxes here. And I really recommend, before going to get your bees to set all of this up outside beforehand. That way it's ready to go and you're ready to transfer them over as soon as you come back from picking them up. So that's exactly what we did is we just took the 5 frames from the nucleus colony and we put them in our 10 frame hive box. And I'm going to talk about hive configurations and all about the boxes and components of the hive boxes in the next PowerPoint. But again, this is just, approaching the subject. So we're not going to go into too many details on how to install a nucleus colony. You can certainly look up a YouTube video on that as well. There's plenty of them out there. But this is us after we finish setting up our both of our nucleus colonies and putting them into their permanent hive boxes. So here's a picture of me moving frames over again. So we did take the 5 frames because this is a 10 frame box. We took 5 frames out of the middle and we just put these 5 frames in that place. And so that provided a space for the bees to expand. So we kept the frames that they were already on in the middle, but then they had room on either side to expand. And then once they filled out that box, we could add another box and so on and so forth. And there's just more pictures of that installation process. More pictures. And so eventually we did expand. We added more boxes on the top, just to provide them more room. You know, they like to build upward and outward. And so providing them more space helps them not want to swarm, because they will leave if they don't have enough space and they'll go find somewhere else to live. And then fast forward a few years, we eventually did add a third hive. So I can't remember which hive it was that we took a split from, but they were one of our hives, one of our original two hives were getting super full and full of bees and full of brood. And, you know, that was a signal to us like, okay, they're probably going to want to swarm soon. And, you know, you don't want your bees to swarm because you're losing out on bees, you're losing out on your investment that you've made. So we did make a split. So what is a split? It's essentially you're making a nucleus colony out of your hive. So instead of putting a nucleus colony in, you literally take frames of resources and frames of bees out and thus create another hive. So that's exactly what we did. We made our own nucleus colony or split and we put it into another box. And now we have three hives, and we don't want any more. Hopefully, we don't expand anymore because it is certainly a lot of work and takes time and space. We're happy with our three hives right now. The Florida Department of Agriculture does recommend starting out with at least three. That way you can compare and contrast colonies or steal resources from another colony that's doing better and put them in ones that are not doing so great. So it is nice, especially when you're first starting out, to be able to have those extra resources and be able to compare and contrast. We do recommend that you have some sort of signage as well in your apiary, especially if you're in a neighborhood, you know, if there's posted signage like, hey, watch out, there's bees in the area, that could help protect you if anybody were to get stung. So moving on to the pest management aspect of this PowerPoint, we did learn, you know, when we had set up our apiary, you know, you don't think about all the things that could happen and then they happen and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? But we really recommend, you know, thinking about pest management proactively, because you're going to get ants, you're going to get varroa mites. And so those are things that you just have to have in your mind when you're beginning beekeeping. So for ants, they will crawl up and they will want to get in your hive either for the honey or the protein. So we recommend getting something called Tanglefoot, and I'll link that in the description box below. But you can get it on Amazon. It comes as a paste or a spray, and you can just spray that at the bottom of your hive stands. That way, um, you know, the ants and anything on the ground wanting to crawl up gets caught in it. It's really, really sticky. And then they can't get into your hive. So that stuff is really great. We had really great luck with the paste. However, it's really sticky. So if you don't wear gloves and you get it on you, like it is really hard to get off. The spray is definitely a better application process, but not as effective. You have to go out and reapply the spray pretty often, especially in the summer when it rains. So I do recommend the paste. However, if you want ease of application, go with the spray. And we do recommend, you know, setting your hives on a stand or some sort of platform off the ground. That will help a lot with pests and anything trying to get into your hive. But it'll also help with your back. You know, bending over and picking up these boxes can be pretty hefty. So um, any way that you can elevate them, definitely do that. So I mentioned varroa mites is a huge problem for honeybees. They're a huge pest. And again, I have a whole presentation about pests later on, but just know that you will have to monitor monthly for varroa mites. And, you know, some beekeepers don't do this, but the University of Florida really recommends doing it monthly because their pest populations can get so high from month to month that one month you could test and your hive is fine, and the next month you could test and your hive is in danger of just dying out because there's just so many varroa mites. So that is something you're going to have to do. Again, there's videos on this. There's tons of videos on this on YouTube, how to do an alcohol wash or a sugar shake to test for varroa mites. So just know that you're going to have to do something like that. You're going to have to get the equipment to be able to do that, because it is necessary. And then over here on the right, those are hive beetles that are in this trap here. So hive beetles are a pest of honeybee hives, just like the varroa mite. If you have honeybees, you're gonna get hive beetles and varroa mites at some point. So it's not really, do I need to treat for them or do I need to monitor for them? It's, I do have to treat for them. I do have to monitor for them. So we've never had to do like a pesticide treatment for hive beetles, but we do use these beetle traps to trap them. And so we put apple cider vinegar here in the middle to kind of attract them to the traps, and then they fall into the mineral oil once they crawl on the trap, and then they kill them. And then we just dump that out every hive inspection and put it back in the hive, refill it, and it'll get more beetles. So that's really effective. And then over here, this is an alcohol wash for varroa mites, and we test 300 bees a month from each hive. And we shake that out and we see how many varroa mites are on them. And depending on if they reach the threshold for treatment, then we will go ahead and use some sort of miticide treatment. Okay, so we talked about biology, we talked about pest management, apiary location, where to get your bees. The last part that we're going to talk about right now is honeybees as a superorganism. So this kind of falls into the biology part, but they are going to want to reproduce, right? So they are their own entity. So think of honeybees as a cell. Every little honeybee in the hive is as their own little cell. But just like our bodies and every other living thing, every cell comes together and acts as one organism. So that's what the honeybees do, and because of that, they act as one creature, and every creature wants to reproduce, right? So they will reproduce as a colony level swarm. And so that is when the queen honeybee will go out, she'll take half the hive of workers, and they will go find a new place to live. And that could be in a tree, in somebody's house, or in a swarm trap if you set one and you're lucky. You could catch a swarm of honeybees. But that is something to think about when you're getting started beekeeping is, okay, how am I going to control swarming? Because they're going to want to. Every spring and summer, that's something that you're going to have to consider because they're going to want to swarm. They're going to want to leave. What can I do to mitigate this process and prevent that? Because I don't want to lose my bees and I don't want to lose my investment and I don't want to contribute to varroa mite levels in feral honeybee colonies. So it's very important. Actually, we're going to be talking about in the next presentation how you have to register your hives in the state of Florida with the Department of Agriculture. And one of the things that they have you sign a document saying that you're going to do is that you're going to prevent swarming as a beekeeper. So to be a good beekeeper, you have to prevent swarming and think about this. So when I was first starting out, I did not know that that was going to happen all the time. I knew it happened. I didn't know it was something that was for sure going to happen like every year. But you need to have a plan. Am I going to make splits? Am I going to expand my apiary? Am I going to give them away? Am I going to sell my bees when I make splits? So that could be a great venture, a great side hustle, on top of collecting honey or producing queens. You could also produce nucleus colonies or splits and sell those as well. But again, just things to have in your head to know before you get started. So here is a picture of what a swarm looks like in a tree. So when they leave the hive, they're going to go look for a new place to live. And they'll do that by leaving the hive, going to a tree or a fence post or a house, and sending a few bees out to look for a permanent location. So if you see a hive like this or a swarm in a tree or a fence post or something, then they're just kind of waiting it out. They're trying to scope out the environment and see where the best place to live could be. So this is like a transitionary period when you see them out like this. They're often waiting to just find a more permanent home. So sometimes you can catch them when they're like this, or you can call a beekeeper and have them do a bee removal and save them. So, like I said, preventing swarming is a huge part of being a beekeeper. Okay, and producing honey is probably the most attractive thing that makes people want to become beekeepers. So this is a frame of what honey looks like. And so, if you see frames like this, then you know, okay, those are ready to harvest, and I've got a bunch of honey here. In our first year, we actually only took 4 frames and harvested them and spun them in an extractor. And we got like 4 gallons of, or not four, we got a gallon of honey. We got 5 gallons this year. But our first year we got 1 gallon out of 4 frames. And we were super happy with that. And we were able to give this to our employees who helped us out with the bees. And it was a really great incentive to have here. So that was an awesome part of the program. But I included all these slides because you have to think about if I'm going to produce honey, I need to have the equipment. I need to have an uncapping scratcher. I need to have a tote. I need to have buckets. I need to have an extractor to actually take the honey from the frames. I've got to get bottles to be able to put all of this honey in. So that is another cost that can come from maintaining beehives. But some other lucrative hive products that people sell, you can harvest the wax and you can make these wax candles or soaps or lip balms. People make mead as well, so it's a honey wine. And even the bees themselves. So you could make splits and sell those nucleus colonies. You could sell queens. You could become a queen producer. So when people's hives go queenless and they need a new queen, they can call you and you can give them one of yours. That's kind of a more advanced beekeeping product to sell, I think. Being a queen producer can be pretty hard, but that's definitely something that is a possibility. So moving on to our helpful resources section of the PowerPoint. To get started, I really recommend connecting with your local beekeepers. There's two local beekeeping groups, the Nature Coast Beekeepers and the Citrus County Beekeepers. So they kind of branched off and formed their own groups. But both are great, and getting involved with either one of those or both is going to help you a lot in getting started because they're local experts who have been beekeeping for a long time, or they're newbies who are in the same boat as you wanting to learn. And so you can just get with those people and go from there. UF IFAS Bee College is also a great program to get involved in. It does cost money, but it's very helpful. They have college level courses on beekeeping, either biology or how to get started with candle making and processing honey. Great program to get involved with. YouTube videos, the UF Honeybee Lab has YouTube videos out there too. Consulting with your other local beekeepers is great. They know what resources are around. They know who you can get bees from, and they can help you learn how to inspect your hive too. You could get a mentor from being involved with your local beekeeper group. So it's very, very helpful. So the next PowerPoint in this series that we're going to be posting is going to be about getting started. So we're going to deep dive into the equipment that you need, how to do a hive inspection, the registration process with the Department of Agriculture. We'll talk about best practices that they recommend, and then of course how to get bees because you want to be aware of any scams and ignore this date down here. This is old. And then after that, we're going to talk about pests and diseases specifically. What drives colony decline? We're going to talk about common pests and diseases and how to prevent them, some solutions, and best management practices as well. Because we don't want our frames to look like this. This is not a healthy frame. There's some emergency queen cups here which signals to me that my bees are wanting to make a new queen. So there's either something wrong with my queen or my bee swarmed and my queen is gone. And then this is pest damage. This is wax moth webbing, which we'll talk about when we get there, but not a good sign to see. So stay tuned for that talk. And I get a lot of my information from the UF Honeybee Lab. So definitely look up their website. They have podcasts, they have videos, they have the Beekeeper, Master Beekeeper program. They've got it all. So definitely check them out. And then Dr. Jamie Ellis, also from the UF Honeybee Lab, did a great talk on YouTube. It's called Evenings at Whitney, Are Honeybees Really Dying? I highly recommend checking this out because he really highlights, the loss of honeybees and how beekeepers are really contributing to keeping them going. And then if you have any questions about anything in this PowerPoint or want to talk more about bees or mosquitoes, let me know. There's my email, and I'll also have that down in the description box below. All right, and that is it. So thank you for sticking around if you made it to the end. And don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for the rest of the videos in this series.